The briefing room was quiet, filled only with the hushed murmurs of high-ranking officers, representatives, and politicians from across Earth's struggling colonies. Captain Marcus Kane, a battle-worn soldier with steely gray eyes and a reputation for survival, stood at the head of the room. The lights dimmed as a hologram projected the enemy they were about to face, a cold, relentless empire that the galaxy feared, the Despotate. For centuries, humanity had wondered about life beyond Earth, hoping for first contact to bring allies, discoveries, or even adventure. But when the Despotate arrived, it wasn't with open hands. The first contact came as a thunderous shockwave across the stars, a Despotate fleet, vast and methodical, dismantling the defenses of humanity's outposts with surgical precision. Their message was clear: resistance was futile. Surrender and accept your place under the Despotate's rule. Marcus clenched his jaw, studying the hologram. The alien ships were intricate, covered in strange markings that looked ancient yet precise, symbols of an empire obsessed with order. They were designed for psychological impact as much as combat, a fearsome sight meant to silence any thoughts of rebellion before they even began. For the Despotate, power was absolute, war was an extension of their will, and unyielding authority was the only way to maintain what they called universal peace. Their methods are ruthless, Captain Kane, General Halford said, his voice gravelly with age. The Despotate rules with an iron fist, offering submission as the only alternative to annihilation. They view us as little more than a backwater species, a disorganized rabble with no concept of discipline. Marcus scoffed. They underestimate us, then. They don't understand that we'll die on our feet before we live on our knees. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, though unease lingered in many faces. Marcus knew they were outgunned, but he also knew humanity's strength lay in something alien to the Despotate: free will, the courage to fight, and the fierce determination to protect their world and their people. The briefing continued, showing clips of battles already fought against the Despotate. Ships crushed under barrages of green energy beams, cities turned to rubble, and the hollow, dispassionate voices of Despotate commanders demanding surrender from every human colony they encountered. Marcus noted every detail: their strategies, weaknesses, the precision of their movements. The Despotate was a machine, a well-oiled hierarchy where every individual was a cog, obeying without question. There was no room for doubt, no deviation from orders. Even their civilian life, they were told, was an exercise in subservience. A single doctrine guided them all: stability through absolute control. The general continued, the Despotate has offered us one final chance to surrender. Their terms are clear: we will be absorbed into their empire, our cultures erased, our leaders replaced. We'd exist but as puppets, a shadow of what we are. Marcus felt the weight of it. To surrender would mean betraying everything humanity stood for, trading freedom for survival. But to fight would mean pain, loss, sacrifice. He knew there was no easy choice, yet there was no question which path they'd take. He looked around the room, meeting each gaze. Some held fear, others resignation. But beneath it all, he saw a spark of defiance. Humanity had always thrived on adversity. They were stubborn, fierce, unwilling to back down. "I'll lead this fight," Marcus said, his voice steady. "If the Despotate thinks they can conquer us with fear, they're mistaken. They don't understand what it means to have something worth fighting for." There was a silence, thick with unspoken tension. Then General Halford nodded. "We'll give them no reason to doubt our resolve, Captain Kane." The hologram shifted, displaying tactical plans, fleet movements, and the locations of Despotate forces near Earth's orbit. Marcus studied every line, every detail, absorbing it like a sponge. He'd need every advantage he could get. As the meeting drew to a close, Halford approached Marcus. "There's something you need to see," he said, his tone low. He led Marcus down a narrow corridor to a secured room where another hologram waited, a captured Despotate commander, expression frozen in cold superiority. "Despotate views on Earth," Halford explained. "This is how they see us." The commander's image spoke, its voice smooth, emotionless. "Your resistance is irrational. The galaxy thrives under our rule. Order is paramount. By refusing surrender, you only invite ruin. We bring peace through unity, through subservience to authority." Marcus scoffed again. "They don't get it. They can't fathom the concept of freedom, can they?" Halford shook his head. "To them, freedom is chaos. They've smothered any hint of rebellion for centuries, but this, Earth, might be the one spark they can't control." Marcus felt a fierce pride swell in him and something deeper, a purpose beyond duty, a calling that resonated in his bones. He was ready to take on the might of the Despotate, to face the Despot of Despots himself if it came to that. Earth was more than just a planet. It was a symbol, a bastion of resilience against a galaxy that wanted it to kneel. Marcus looked at Halford, resolve burning in his eyes. Then let's show them what real defiance looks like. The sky above the colony of New Horizon was a blaze of fire and metal. Despotate ships descended like dark, silent predators, their sleek forms gliding through the atmosphere with calculated menace. Captain Marcus Kane watched from a battered trench as the world around him turned into a battlefield. His men were huddled low, readying for the next assault, faces pale but determined. "Incoming!" a soldier shouted, and the sky flared green as energy beams from the Despotate's warships sliced through the defenses with terrifying precision. Explosions roared and rubble filled the air as another line of barricades was obliterated. The ground shook beneath Marcus's feet, and he felt the weight of the Despotate's tactics. A deliberate, unrelenting push designed to crush every last hope. Marcus gritted his teeth, pushing down the fear. He'd been trained for this, for the feeling of standing on the edge of defeat and refusing to fall. The Despotate believed in submission as a virtue, but he was determined to show them that humanity's strength lay in defiance. He ducked low, pulling his communicator close. "This is Captain Kane to command. We're holding but barely. Any reinforcements?" A moment of static crackled, then the voice of General Halford came through, tight with tension. "Negative, Captain. All other units are engaged. You're on your own." Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Understood, sir." Turning back to his troops, he scanned their faces. They were young, many of them barely more than recruits, thrown into a conflict they hardly understood. Yet every pair of eyes was locked on him, awaiting his orders, trusting him to guide them through. "Listen up," he shouted over the distant roar of cannons. "The Despotate wants us to break, to kneel and surrender. They see us as weak because we value freedom. But that's our strength. Hold the line. Fight for each other, fight for New Horizon. Show them what it means to stand together." A murmur of assent spread through the ranks, a small ember of hope rekindled. The soldiers readied their weapons, steadying themselves as the next wave of Despotate infantry approached in flawless formation, faces blank, every step precise. Marcus moved forward, firing at the advancing troops, his every move calculated but defiant. He took down one enemy soldier, then another, his actions igniting his soldiers, who rallied and followed his lead. They fought as a unified force, refusing to yield an inch, determined to show the Despotate that they would not be intimidated. As the battle raged, Marcus caught sight of a young lieutenant, hands trembling as he reloaded his weapon. For a moment the lieutenant's gaze met Marcus's, and something in the captain's eyes seemed to steady him. He raised his weapon, firm, and resumed firing. Hours passed and the assault was relentless. Marcus could feel exhaustion creeping in, the weight of each loss carving into his resolve. But still they fought on, their will unbroken. Finally, as the dust began to settle, the Despotate forces retreated, withdrawing with mechanical precision. New Horizon had held, if only by a thread. Marcus slumped against a wall, catching his breath. Around him, survivors embraced, sharing quiet words of victory amid the ruins. They had endured. For now they had shown the Despotate that humanity was no easy conquest. He straightened, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. The Despotate may have power, but they could never understand the strength born of freedom, the will that came from defiance. And as long as that spirit lived, humanity would fight. Captain Marcus Kane sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the cold metal floor of his quarters. Around him, the ship's hum seemed louder than usual, pressing into the silence that hung heavy after the latest transmission from command. He replayed the words in his mind, each one a reminder of the burden he carried. The Despotate had retaliated. Not with brute force this time, but with a chilling tactic: psychological warfare. They had launched a campaign designed to erode the will to resist, broadcasting propaganda directly to every human colony and outpost. The broadcasts slipped through any defense, infiltrating every comm channel, filling the minds of soldiers and civilians alike with messages of despair. A voice echoed through his communicator, smooth, emotionless, unyielding. "To fight us is to choose destruction. Your struggle is futile. Surrender and be spared the needless suffering your leaders have inflicted upon you." Marcus clenched his fists, a muscle in his jaw twitching. He knew what the Despotate was doing, sowing doubt, seeding fear, weakening their morale. He could see the toll it was taking on his crew. Some looked haunted, questioning the fight they were in. Others, young recruits, struggled to shake off the seductive pull of the enemy's promises of peace. Every word dripped with subtle threats, yet each sentence dangled the illusion of safety if they would only submit. But he could see that the price of surrender was far higher than the Despotate let on. The door slid open and Lieutenant Sarah Holden stepped in, her face pale. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Captain, we just received word from New Cairo Colony. They've surrendered." The word struck like a physical blow. New Cairo had been a beacon of hope, a fierce colony that had sworn to hold the line. And now they had broken. Surrendered. It was the first true crack in humanity's resistance. Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing the doubt that lingered in her eyes, the questions she didn't dare ask. He stood, his voice low but filled with a quiet intensity. "They want us to think that surrender will save us. That submission is a path to peace. But all they offer is chains. They want us to forget that our strength lies in our freedom, that what we fight for is more than survival. It's our right to choose to live as we are." Sarah looked away, her gaze troubled. "But Captain, how many more can we lose? How many more can we hold together before we all break?" Marcus placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his eyes fierce. "Every battle we fight, every inch we hold, is a message to the Despotate. We are more than just a species to be ruled. We may bleed, we may break, but as long as we stand together, they will never truly conquer us." Sarah nodded, a glimmer of determination returning to her face. As she left, Marcus turned to the viewport, watching the stars beyond. The price of defiance was steep, pain, loss, and endless sacrifice. But he knew deep down that the alternative was far worse. In every soul that resisted, in every act of courage, there was something the Despotate could never crush. As long as even one human defied them, humanity's spirit would live on. The battle had been brutal and Captain Marcus Kane's forces were battered, but they had broken through. Standing in the charred ruins of the Despotate's central fortress, Marcus felt the weight of countless sacrifices press on him. Behind him, soldiers moved cautiously, sweeping the area for any lingering threats. They were victorious, yet the atmosphere was thick with tension. Something darker still awaited them. Ahead, within the massive command chamber, a single figure awaited him. The despot himself, ruler of the Despotate, a legend whispered across countless worlds as the unyielding, omnipotent tyrant. The despot was a tall, imposing figure, cloaked in robes of dark gray, his face obscured beneath a metallic mask that glinted in the dim light. His voice was low, controlled as he addressed Marcus, each word slow, calculated. "Captain Kane," he said, nodding almost in acknowledgement, "you have fought fiercely beyond what I thought possible for your kind." Marcus clenched his fist, standing firm. "Save your flattery. We're here to end your reign." The despot tilted his head slightly, almost in amusement. "Is that what you think? That ending me will somehow free you? You misunderstand. I do not rule because I want power. I rule because your galaxy cannot survive without control, without order." Marcus scoffed, his voice sharp. "Your idea of order is slavery. You don't see people, you see subjects. Pawns." The despot's gaze didn't waver. "Centuries ago I too believed as you do. I fought for freedom. I led rebellions, tried to give people choice. Do you know what happened?" He took a step closer, his tone growing colder. "Chaos. Or endless suffering. I realized that peace requires strength, unity, absolute control. The sacrifices made by your people, they are inevitable. Necessary." Marcus shook his head. "You think you're the solution, but you're the disease. You use fear to keep entire worlds in line, you crush any voice that dares question you. That isn't peace." The despot regarded him, almost pityingly. "Peace is rarely kind, Captain. Your people, your precious freedom, will only lead to ruin. Chaos will tear you apart, just as it nearly tore apart the galaxy before I intervened." Marcus felt a surge of anger but also clarity. He stepped forward, meeting the despot's gaze. "Maybe peace isn't easy, but that doesn't mean it has to come from fear. Humanity doesn't need your chains. We'll find our own way, even if it's difficult, even if it's painful. Freedom means we have the right to choose, to fail and to learn from it. You may see that as weakness, but it's strength." For a moment, silence hung between them, then the despot's shoulders seemed to sag, the slightest sign of weariness. "Perhaps, one day you will understand," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. In a swift, final motion, Marcus raised his weapon. The despot's reign ended with a single shot. As Marcus looked around the silent chamber, he knew the fight wasn't over. The galaxy would not change overnight. But this was a beginning. Humanity had taken a stand, defied a despot of despots, and claimed their right to shape their future. And for the first time Marcus believed that freedom, true freedom, was possible.